Alright, so I think it almost goes without saying that in our area, we are pretty wealthy. And I don't just mean Los Altos, which is kind of the iconic one, but Mountain View, Palo Alto, wherever you may live, this area is pretty damn well off. And I think in somebody's live script, maybe it's Isabel's, she mentioned that we have picture-perfect childhoods. We get birthday parties, we have an amazing school system, the town is safe, I mean, everything's great. And as we mature, it's not just birthday parties and childhood that we care about, we get nice cars, we get mansions, and there's this notion in our culture that this kind of stuff leads to happiness, that money is happiness. And you can connect it to the American dream, Great Gatsby, whatever you want. People come to America, they work hard, they make money, they get whatever they want, and that's literally living the dream. And so this is actually a very logical mindset. Because as humans, money means that we have water, it means that we have food, it essentially means that we have life. And so if money is essential to the very basic blocks of life, it makes sense that money is essential to everything else in life, anything we can want. That being said, there is definitely not always happiness in Los Altos or any wealthy area in general. As much money as people have, a lot of your live scripts, a lot of your senior project presentations mention that a lot of us suffer from depression, whether it's us personally or people we know. A lot of people are actually not happy. People with money are often sad. And so this got me wondering, how is it possible that if money leads to cars, leads to houses, leads to happiness, why are so many people sad? Why are people depressed? Why is there any notion that people in Los Altos should ever not be happy? Is this mindset, the American dream, all that accurate? Is it that money really leads to happiness? Is that true? And so this became my essential question. It really got me wondering, what leads to happiness? Does money even matter? Because if money did matter and it was the only factor in how happy people were, people in this area would be unbelievably happy. Everybody would be cheery. Everybody would be glowy. There would be no question as to how happy people are. And so this really hit home with me, because over the past 10 or so years, my family's personal financial situation has been very stressful. And this is partly because both my parents opted into being unemployed. My mom wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, my dad wanted to pursue his own ambitions, and so financially, my family's had a lot of struggle over the past 8-10 years, and it culminated 2 years ago when we sold our house in Los Altos and moved to Mountain View. And so it really got me wondering, because as I was in this moving process, as my parents were constantly frugal, I was always wondering, if only I had a little more money, I would be so much happier. And then I started this research, and that mindset got completely shattered. So I was really wondering, is this true? Is it really that money leads to happiness? And so before I could answer this question, I had to ask myself, what is happiness? Because I can put this yellow happy face on, or yellow smiley face on the screen, and everybody understands that it's a metaphor for the word happiness, but nobody really has any understanding past that. Because we can see each other smiling or laughing, and we think happiness, but if I ask you to really think what makes you happy and what it means to be happy, you wander off into weird abstractions, and you don't have any definitive measure. There's no way of quantifying happiness, there's no way of understanding what it is other than this yellow smiley face. So this became my first big question of my senior project. And so, as I researched happiness, there are a bajillion theories and a bajillion studies, but basically it boils down to two main categories. There's hedonism and there's life satisfaction. And so to demonstrate hedonism and to also keep you guys somewhat entertained, I brought Oreos. And so Kendall, you can take an Oreo or two and pass them around. So if you want an Oreo, go ahead and take one. And so hedonism is the idea that your happiness is made up of lots of little bits of happiness. Your overall enjoyment is just lots and lots of instances of pleasure. And so by giving you Oreos, I'm just giving you one instant of pleasure. And if other good things happen in your day, that's going to make for a happy day. So if you go to Starbucks and instead of a small coffee, they give you a medium coffee, you're just like, oh, hell yes. And I'm giving you cookies in 7 periods, it's all good. And so hedonists believe that with lots of little bits of happiness, that's what makes our day-to-day happiness, that's what makes our life happiness in general, from lots of small instances. However, this makes you wonder, if I'm giving you Oreos now, are you really going to care about these Oreos at lunch? And even more so, are you really going to care about these Oreos a week from now? Because how can something so small be so impactful in your overall happiness? And so the other side is the life satisfaction view. And life satisfaction theorists believe that it's not really about what happens on your day-to-day basis, it's really about how you feel about your life as a whole. So are you feeling secure about your future? Do you feel okay with where your life is going? Do you feel that you have purpose, meaning? All these things are important in how happy people are. And so between these two, there are a bunch of studies, and there are lots of inner theories that go somewhere in between. And basically all I came to the conclusion is that happiness is somewhere in between these two. It's not completely a matter of getting Oreos in second period, but it's also not completely a matter of feeling that your life is going in the right direction. Somewhere there is a medium where you need Oreos in second period sometimes, but you also want to be fairly secure that everything is going well. And so with this mindset is where I moved on to deal with money. But before I can get into any of these impacts of how money affects happiness, there's one important caveat. So for people like us who are having our water, having our food, having our shelter, money and happiness is very murky, and so that's why it's worth studying. But for people who are homeless, who don't have water every day, who don't have food every day, who lack shelter, money and happiness, there's this very obvious correlation, that if they get more money, they will be happier. Because if you're starving on the streets and sleeping in the gutter, it makes sense that if you got a few more dollars and were able to buy some food for that day, you'd be a lot happier. So all of my considerations only deal with people who are above sustenance level, which basically means that they have all of their basic needs fulfilled. And so that doesn't just mean food, water, shelter, that also kind of includes like ability to get yourself to where you need to go. So if you have a car, or like in modern days you need internet access, maybe a phone. And so these basic necessities, which all of us have, are assumed to be obtained in all of my considerations. So as I studied the impact of money on happiness, there are actually a bunch of subcategories that I came across. You can look into how children tend to act with their money, and children tend to be very generous and willing to share their money. And it was interesting because as we grow, it makes it seem like we lose these childhood tendencies and we're more frugal. There's this idea of relative wealth and how our money compares to other people's money. There's this idea of altruism and giving and how it can benefit you so much to give away your money even if you're not buying something with it. There's this idea of buying experiences versus buying things, which is somewhat self-explanatory. And I could go into any of these for like 20 minutes on their own, but for the interest of time, I'm only going to go into the one that I found most interesting, which is relative wealth. And so the idea of relative wealth is how your money compares to everybody else's money around you. And so unsurprisingly, if you have the same amount of money as everybody else in the room, you don't really care about it. It's basically has no effect on your happiness, this idea that how your money compares to anyone else, because you're all on an equal playing field. It gets slightly more interesting if you have more money than everyone else. If you have more money than anyone else, one would think that you get a better car, you get a better house, you get a better whatever you want, and that you'd be happier. But in fact, when people have more money than anyone else, they try to dumb it down. They try to act like they're not that much out of the norm, that they're on an equal playing field. They try to argue that their money isn't as substantial. And you see this in things like politics. The 1% always argues that, oh, we pay the same taxes, we pay the same everything, we're on an equal playing field as the 99%. When it really gets interesting is when you have less money than everyone else. When your money is this small little dollar sign and your neighbors both have giant dollar signs. When you have so much less money, a substantial amount less money than your neighbors, when you're driving some crappy Ford and both your neighbors have an Audi R8, you are significantly sadder. And it's not that you're actually poor, it's that in comparison to the people near you, you are very poor. So you could take this person who drives a Ford and put him in a neighborhood where everybody drives a Ford and all have that amount of money, and he'd be completely fine, he'd be happy. But if you put this fairly well-off person in a neighborhood where everybody else is unbelievably rich, they're going to feel like crap. And so this actually hit home with me a lot with my personal financial situation, because when my family struggled financially, it's like all of my neighbors in Los Altos are super rich, and basically everybody in Los Altos is very rich, but I knew that my family was on the brink of having to move, and it was very stressful. And so this helped me understand like why that was so impactful for me. So this hit home. So without further ado, I'm going to get into my hands-on. But before I really get into what I did, I have to describe the incredible struggle of finding a hands-on project for a project like this. Because anybody interested in the field of happiness or psychology basically goes out and does an experiment. They get a bunch of participants, they control a bunch of variables, they make something happen and see how it affects people. Unfortunately, I don't have the resources, the time, the commitment to make an experiment like that. And so I had to find something else. And so what I ended up doing was taking my hands-on experience, not necessarily going out into the world, but making it a personal endeavor. And so with my hands-on experience, I wanted to figure out what made me happy and how money, if I could, affected that. And so what I ended up doing is I used this program called MoodScope. And what MoodScope does is each day you take this little quiz and you measure your mood. And so at first I was very skeptical of how this could possibly work, because I'd just done a bunch of research that says it's hard to quantify happiness, there's no set theory. And so I actually went out and I interviewed the founder of MoodScope, his name is John Cousins, and he explained to me that it is definitely impossible for anybody to quantify their happiness on a scale of 1 to 100 if some therapist is like, how do you feel right now? So what he designed is this system that asks you not about happiness, but an array of 20 emotions, things like nervousness, things like pride, things like inspiration, and how you feel on those, just on a scale of 0 to 4. And so with that, it's very easy for you to say, oh, I'm feeling extremely nervous today, or I'm feeling a little nervous today, because it's not as daunting as saying on a scale of 0 to 100, how nervous are you? And so with these emotions, he has this algorithm that tells you your mood on a scale of 0 to 100 through these emotions. And so I started doing this at the end of February, and so each day it also allows you to add a little comment. So I'd say the important things that happened to me that day, like if I did something worth noting, and I also wanted to incorporate like how much money I spent, because that was part of my project. So I noted the day-to-day spending I did. So if I went out to lunch, if I got gas, I would leave a comment about that. As I mentioned, money day-to-day doesn't make as big an impact as like your money situation overall, so that didn't yield anything interesting, but my comments themselves were actually very important. So I started in February at the end, and I did every day in March, every day in April, and every day in May up until now. And so this is only half my hands-on project, recording everything, but also I wanted to look at this data and notice any trends that I could find. Because if I could find something that consistently made me happier every day, I would want to repeat that. I would want to do it more and more so I'd overall be happier. So if we look at my data from February and March, you can notice that almost all of these data points are in the lower section of my range, which is the blue and red dashed lines. In fact, that green line in the middle is my average happiness, and almost all the data points in March and February are below that. In comparison, in April and May, almost everything is above that. So clearly something happened at the end of March, beginning of April, that made me a lot happier. And so I looked into this, and basically on March 27th was when a whole bunch of my college decisions came out. And so I wouldn't have thought much of this, because getting into a college is like, oh hell yes, that's the iconic high school thing that everybody wants to do. But it was interesting to me because had somebody asked me in January and February and March if I was stressed about college, I would have said no. Because I was fine going to any of my safety schools, I knew I would get in somewhere, and so I would have told you that I wasn't stressed about college decisions at all. So it was very interesting when I looked at this data to see that even though that was my impression, as soon as I got into college, and I didn't even get into all of my top choices, it says rejected everywhere else, so I was like 7 schools, I was so much happier. And you can go back one slide to April and May, like on average I was up in this 70–80% range, which doesn't mean a lot, but it was higher than where I was before, which was around 60%. And so it was very interesting that something that I thought was not being stressful whatsoever was actually stressing me out a lot. I couldn't actively go out and find more things that were stressing me like this, but it was worth noting that if I had discredited something that I thought had no impact on me, it certainly could still be bothering me psychologically. So one other trend I found was at the end of February, I spontaneously decided to perform Poetry Slam. And this was very out of character because I'm a person that likes to have everything planned out, have everything thought out way ahead of time. But second period comes and there's an announcement about if you still want to do this, go for it. And I was sitting there and I looked at Mr. Kwan, I was like, should I do this? And he was like, go for it. So last minute I decided to perform Poetry Slam. I had to write a poem later that afternoon. And so I continued to act out of character. For some reason I had this motivation to actually make this poem legit and personally significant. Because usually I would try to make this poem a joke or like have fun with it and not really open up. But when I wrote this poem, I threw all of my emotion into it. I opened up to my insecurities, and as a generally reserved person, that was completely new to me. And so, as a person that's generally confident in front of audiences, when I performed this poem, I was incredibly nervous, more so than I've ever been before. And so had somebody told me ahead of time, like, you're going to be really nervous, you're going to open up to all your insecurities, you're going to do it in front of a stage of people, I would have been like, that will be the worst day of my life. But in fact, when I did this Poetry Slam, it improved my mood drastically. And the 2 days before that are actually the lowest days I have on record over the past 4 months. And so it was very noteworthy to me that I could do something that was so out of character, so spontaneous, and that it actually improved my mood where I would have thought that it would make me a lot worse. So looking at this, I noticed this sometime in March or April, I was like, I'm going to make this happen again. So at the end of April, I asked Kendall to prom through our live scripts, and Kendall actually knew I was going to ask her to prom like 3 weeks before I did it. So if I really wanted to, I could have grabbed flowers and a lame poster and be like, Kendall, let's go to prom, yay. But I wanted to make an effort to make this a notable experience. I wanted to make it something audacious. I wanted to do something with this opportunity to make it more fun. And so I did something spontaneous again. I did something bold. And as I reflect on the past few months, that's one of the days that comes to mind. It's like, I had fun that day, that was a great day. And again, my data reflects that. That's one of the highest data points of the past 4 months. And so there are things like this that I wouldn't have expected made me so much happier, but really did. And so what I learned, those were just 2 examples, but there are a few others in those 4 months, that being spontaneous for me, which I thought was so out of character, which I would never want to do as a logical, methodical person, I don't want to be spontaneous, but it made me so much happier. And so that was one of my big takeaways from this hands-on experience, and I really hope to actually continue recording my mood with MoodScope so I can keep looking at trends like this, but to be more spontaneous, to take a bit of adventure and to go out and do something. And so what I'm asking of you guys is that you're probably not like me. I'm sure some of you are spontaneous and not methodical and logical, but there is something that you're not considering that makes you happy. There's something that you might shy away from, that you're timid about, that will improve your day drastically. If you don't usually have dinner with your parents, try it. If you don't usually watch TV and you like reading science textbooks, pick up the TV remote. If you never go for a walk, go for it. Because at some point you'll find something that you find that improves your day so much that it'll be incredibly worth it. And at the end of the day, being happy is what really matters. So that's all I have.